Greetings from Suva, Fiji, Bulavinaka, distinguished delegates, officials from national statistical offices, development partners, friends from media, colleagues from crop agencies and the UN agencies. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to you all to the Pacific breakout session of the launch of the SDG Progress Report 2022. I am Sudip Ranjan Basu, Deputy Head of the ESCAP Pacific Office, and have the immense pleasure to moderate this breakout session. We are delighted to note that we have over 70 delegates participating registered already for this breakout session for the Pacific. This really shows the importance of data and statistics that is there to uncover the SDG progress and to really allow us to see how we are making progress, and we can monitor that progress as well. In terms of the format of this breakout session, I'm very pleased to inform you that my dear colleague Christopher Ryan, our statistician in the Pacific Office of ESCAP, will give you a short overview of the Pacific results from the SDG Progress Report 2022, and that will be followed by three distinguished panelists showcasing the issues of the national level as the sub-regional or the Pacific level as well. And after that, we'll open up for some additional questions. We already received some questions, so we'll try to answer them. And then we have about 5 minutes or so we can take some other questions as well. So with that short introduction, may I request my colleague Chris to present the key highlights for the Pacific region. Chris, over to you, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sudip. And while I'm introducing myself, I'll just ask if our colleague Arisi can put the PowerPoint up. But yeah, good afternoon to most of you, but good morning for those who might be in another part of the world outside the Pacific. As Sudip mentioned, my name's Chris Ryan, and I'm the statistician with the ESCAP Pacific Office. And what I've been tasked with today is to just give a very brief sort of overview on the progress report and what it's telling us for the Pacific. And I'm going to break it down into a few different sort of components. Firstly, I mean, similar to what we just saw with the regional assessment, which Armin provided, I'm going to give a bit of a snapshot on how the Pacific's going at both the goal and the target level. I then just want to run through some examples of what sort of results can be produced at the indicator level, and I'm going to focus on some of the priority goals for this year's high-level political forum. I'm then also, similar to what Armin tackled, I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation on data availability with respect primarily to global SDG indicators, and then just finish with a couple of little thoughts on where we need to move on, as what the next steps will be for this progress monitoring for the SDGs. Next slide, thanks, Chrissy. So this slide has already been shown to you in the last presentation by Armin, but I just want to highlight a little bit more about what's happening in the Pacific here. So I'll put a little red circle around the region, and as you can clearly see, I mean, there's for the Pacific region, there are no goals which are on track to be meeting the desired targets of 2030. And probably more concerning is we have 5 goals in our Pacific region which aren't just on track, but they're going the wrong way. So if you look out to the far right under the heading of regressed, you can see goals 6, 10, 11, 12 and 13 are moving backwards from where we want to be. And equally concerning is we also, for the remaining goals, we have 5 goals which, although they might be progressing very slightly, it's close enough to being stagnant. So those goals of goals 1, 2, 4, 8 and 16 aren't really moving much at all. Next slide, thanks, Arisi. This slide was also shown by Armin. So this is what things look like for the Pacific region. So once again, I mean, the important thing to look at here is the 2021 marker, which is the black line down the middle. And that's where we hope those bar charts will be reaching by by now in order to be on track for reaching the targets by 2030. So once again, this is just another way of demonstrating the fact that for no goals in the Pacific are we on track. And there are a few here, which we saw in the last slide. There's 5 goals which are going backwards. Also worth noting in this bit of analysis is some of the bars are shaded, and I think that's referring for goals 5, 14 and 16. And that's also an indication we don't have a huge amount of data to really come up with a proper assessment against that goal. Next, thanks, please. Next slide. So once again, this is similar to what was shown in the earlier presentation, but now we're looking at just the Pacific. It's the same analysis, but it's quite different sort of results. And the main difference here is we have a lot more grey than what you see for the Asia Pacific as a region. And so that's basically suggesting that when we go down to the target level for the grouping of countries just for the Pacific, we don't have enough data to tell a story, and it's on more than 50% of the occasions. So, oops, sorry, can we go back? So, yeah, so out of the 169 targets, there's 87 of them have been shaded grey. So we see we're really lacking data, and we're only, if you look at the ones which are a little bit more positive, the ones which are on progress, there's only 3 targets on progress, 2 in goal 8 and 1 in goal 17 and so forth. So it's a little bit of a sad picture for the Pacific. Next slide, please. All right. For this particular slide, I mean, I'm going to show 2 slides now. So I'm now delving at the indicator level and what sort of information we can get from the SDG Gateway, which is the source of information for this Asia Pacific SDG Progress Report. So what we can do in the actual gateway, we can click on goals, looking at the charts I showed on a couple of slides back, and it gives a bit of a snapshot as to what's actually happening within the indicators for that particular goal. So I'm showing these 2 slides, and hang on, I've lost the picture. Is it still there? Yep. If you just go back to the previous slide. Yep. So I'm showing these 2 slides not because I want to generate discussion about why things are moving the way they are for these particular indicators, but just giving an example of what sort of information can be extracted from the SDG Gateway. And what I tend to do when I look at this sort of information, if there's something there of interest, and it could be for for this slide now, oops, yeah, for this slide now, which has goal 4, where things are regressing for 4.1.1 on minimum proficiency. What you can do is you can then delve into the Data Explorer feature of the Gateway and learn a little bit more as to what's happening there by looking at the actual raw data for countries over time for that indicator. Next slide. Thanks. And I'll quickly skim over this one because it's just a repeat for 2 of the other goals. So this is also a similar thing for goals 14 and 15. Also, it's worth noting here for goal 14, you'll see that there's only 3 indicators there in that little graph on the right. So it just means we don't have sufficient data for the other indicators for the Pacific to be able to come up with a fair assessment for that. Next slide, please. Okay, and this graph, I mean, you've probably got a fair idea now that we do have a problem with data availability from what Armin discussed in the regional session and from what I've been showing you so far in this breakout session. So this is pretty much how things look at the country level on how much data is available for each country, and including Australia and New Zealand with all the Pacific Island countries as well. But we need to bear in mind that these are, and Armin's pointed this out quite a bit earlier, that these are indicators which are collected. These are the SDG global indicators. So these are indicators which the custodian agencies oversee, and they work with the countries to compile this data before passing it on to ESCAP for inclusion in this analysis. So there can be some lag sometimes in populating that database. So that could cause some of the problems with the lowish numbers here. But also we need to bear in mind and probably more importantly, that there is a lot of other data and indicators that countries are producing out there, which aren't specifically SDG indicators, but can also be quite useful for helping to monitor progress against the SDG. So although this does look a little bit dire, it's probably not as dire as it needs to be. Next slide, I think it's my final one. So yeah, just to finish up, just a couple of points on where to from now. Although that didn't look overly exciting, that last one with regards to how much data we have, if we look at this little graph on the left-hand side, we can see that things have been improving quite significantly over the last couple of years. So the first bars for 2019 up to 2021, it's about a 20–30% improvement in the number of indicators we've got data for. And we're expecting that trend to continue. But message number one is it's not going to happen without the continued efforts of countries and partners. So we really need to keep this momentum going. And the second point on the right, and Armin touched upon this about the monitoring of national SDG progress. I mean, it's very important that countries aim to tailor this monitoring process to meet their national needs. And he talked about a couple of things very briefly, and we might hear a little bit more about it from the interventions from a couple of countries, but you'll get a lot more powerful and useful story about how your country is tracking against the SDGs if you do incorporate a lot of your own national indicators, which are highly relevant to yourself, and even adjusting the targets to make them more nationally relevant to you as well. So we do encourage the countries in the Pacific to look at picking up the National SDG Tracker, and we're very fortunate because we promoted this tool last year when it first came out. Fortunate there's been a number of countries that are picking up, and we hope that others do follow in that lead. And I'll wrap up there. Thanks.
Privatization, as I said.
So yeah, that's all from me. So handing it back to you, Sudeep.
Thank you, Chris, for very clear overview of the Pacific situation, both in terms of the data availability and also in terms of the progress that the countries are making here in this Pacific region. So before we go for some questions on this one, may I have the pleasure to invite our three distinguished panelists here. First, Mr. Krish Singh, Senior Development Finance Analyst and Officer in Charge for International Cooperation, Ministry of Economy, Government of Fiji. Sir, may I request you to have your intervention, please? Over to you, Mr. Singh.
Good afternoon and Bola Binaka's distinguished excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Fijian government, I first of all convey our sincere appreciation to you and ESCAP for providing us this platform to share our experiences, opportunities, and lessons learned in our journey of adopting and reporting on the 2030 agenda. It is without a doubt that the ambitions of the SDGs have been hindered due to the
Dear friends, we have some issues with the power surge here in our building, given that we have heavy lightning and thunderstorm happening right now here in Suva. So can you hear us, please, by the way?
Yes, we can hear you well.
It's good at the moment, Sudi.
Right. I think our colleagues in the Ministry of Economy, they are next to 2 hours, as you may know. I think that may be also affecting their participation. Kindly bear with us for a few minutes.
Sudi, can I possibly suggest we move to Samoa and then we can come back to Fiji if that works?
Wonderful. Yes. So meanwhile, may I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Benjamin Sila, Assistant CEO, Social and Environmental Statistics Division, Samoan Bureau of Statistics, Government of Samoa, to have the floor. Mr. Sila, over to you, please. Thank you. Mr. Sila, are you there? Mr. Sila, are you there? Maybe we can come back to both the government of Fiji and Samoa shortly, but maybe we can continue. Our third distinguished presenter is Ms. Alison Culpin, Social Statistics Advisor, SDGs with Statistics for Development Division, Pacific Community SPC. Ms. Culpin, may I request you to have your brief intervention, please? Over to you.
Thank you, Sudeep, and hopefully third time lucky. So yes, thanks for the opportunity to present our reflections as a development partner. And speaking as a statistician, there's always two aspects to progress. Progress in measurement and progress in the targets themselves. So I think we've learnt from the two presentations, both in the main section and from Chris this afternoon, that we've made some progress in the region. We have, it's always easy, of course, to focus on the gaps and the work still to be done. But I would like to start by congratulating the Pacific countries on how far they have come over the last 4 years in embracing the SDG indicators and the national efforts put towards measuring and achieving change. So this includes the Pacific National Statistics Offices, of course, but the reach is a lot broader now due to the National VNR working groups, the stakeholder consultations that have been part of that, the desire of civil society organisations to contribute to Agenda 2030, and indeed interest at the parliamentary level to understand and integrate SDGs into national activities. So all of that means that as we pull together information for our second regional Sustainable Development Report for Pacific leaders, it's really incredibly pleasing to see the improvement in the spread of indicators for which we now have data in the Pacific Data Hub. And some of this is through more targeted surveys that directly deliver SDG indicator data that have been embraced by countries. And I commend UNICEF here for the rollout of the mixed survey tool in the region. But most notably, now we're in a position to evaluate progress against SDG 14, which was a high Pacific priority, but an area where there was no data until recently. And this has been made possible through country interest and engagement again, and questionnaires administered by FAO, and targeted Pacific training workshops in which we've been privileged to partner in. Efforts to make the indicators more relevant to the Pacific context are continuing, and Chris touched on this with the National SDG Tracker and the complementary data that does exist. An example of this is the discussions by the Pacific Statistics Methods Board on how poverty measurement can better fit the needs of Pacific countries. And also we heard from Chris about the lack of progress in literacy and numeracy in SDG 4. But in the region, we've been able to use regional student performance data from the Pacific Island Literacy and Numeracy Assessment. And this has given us some time series data and the promise of new data points every 3 years. And that's showing some positive progress. Yes, there's a lot of variability within countries, but the vast majority of countries are moving forward. The focus now needs to be on improving the availability of disaggregated data to truly understand and address those groups being left behind, while also addressing broader national planning needs. Some exciting initiatives are in train, and we hope that coordinated support from development partners in the region will successfully support countries to develop this area. So I hope when we speak next, we'll have some even more good stories to tell. So that's just a few words, and I hope I'm giving a more positive, reflection on the state of the region and the progress that has been made in the last 4 years. Thanks, Sudeep. Back to you.
Thank you, Alison, for the optimism. We really need that. We need to progress together. We need to work together. So I think we really appreciate, that that positive momentum that you're bringing in the discussion. So I think we can go back again to our colleagues, friends from the government of Fiji. Mr. Singh, are you there online now? Over to you, Mr. Singh. Apologies for that little
thank you, Mr. Lassad. Not a problem, not a problem. Good afternoon and Bula Vinaka once again, distinguished excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Fijian government, I first of all convey our sincere appreciation to ESCAP for providing us this platform to share our experiences, opportunities, and lessons learned in our journey of adopting and reporting on the 2030 agenda. It is without a doubt that the ambitions of the SDGs have been hindered due to COVID-19, and developing countries, including Fiji, have been left to rebuild and reclaim years of development progress. However, despite the setbacks of the pandemic, Fiji has remained steadfast towards progressing on the Sustainable Development Goals. Fiji has advanced on a number of policy actions to strengthen our progress on the goals relating to climate action. Fiji launched the National Ocean Policy in 2020, providing specifics on a healthy ocean that will sustain the livelihood and aspirations of current and future generations. The recent endorsement of the Climate Change Act in September 2021 by the Fijian government was a significant achievement that has enshrined in law our domestic responses to the climate threats, which will now be at the heart of our national policies and priorities. Further, in January 2022, the Fijian government has also endorsed the NDC investment plan, which provides mitigation priorities and opportunities in the transport and energy sector to be implemented from 2021 to the end of 2030. It sets out strategic approach to financing projects by subsector, which includes aggregated costs, GHG mitigation potential, and co-benefits, including linkage to the most applicable SDGs. In addition to this, the Fijian government will soon be endorsing its climate finance strategy that will identify key investment priorities for climate adaptation and mitigation over the short to medium term. This strategy highlights Fiji's main investment priorities for cultivating a climate-resilient, low-carbon economy, and will act as a guide for the Fijian government and international development partners. On the socio-economic front, the Fijian government has introduced a number of unemployment assistance schemes to support the Fijian people facing job losses due to the global pandemic. The Fijian government continued with its social welfare assistance and unemployment benefit to lighten the burden on the people. More than 500 million has been paid out towards unemployment assistance since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, benefiting more than 400,000 Fijians. Payments were facilitated through digital platforms, which made it easier for Fijians to access this support. Further to this, assistance was also provided to small businesses through the COVID-19 concessional loan packages for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Coupling the economic and social impacts, the COVID-19 pandemic also disrupted teaching and learning for students through periodic closures of schools. However, the Fijian government continued its commitment to ensuring that access to quality education is still maintained. The major challenge which remained on hand was to eliminate the learning gap due to the social inequalities and to recover from the learning loss. As such, the Fijian government swiftly responded through the use of digital platforms to provide learning resources and also provided targeted support to those who did not have access to educational learning materials through electronic and digital platform. Further, in times of the global pandemic, Fiji has remained thankful to the unending support from key development partners in addressing the immediate threats of COVID-19. The availability of vaccines to Fiji has tremendously allowed us to once again open our international borders and revive the Fijian economy, which is heavily dependent on tourism for creating employment for the many Fijians. In terms of current progress for monitoring the SDGs, Fiji has successfully integrated the SDG principles, goals, and targets into the 5-year and 20-year National Development Plan and has established an enabling environment for the implementation of the SDGs through integration into national policies and sectoral policies. The NDP indicators and trackers are based on the UN SDG framework, and at present, Fiji has a total of 35 NDP indicators and 90 NDP trackers. In addition, government ministries have strategic development plans in which the SDGs have been very well mainstreamed. The Ministry of Economy has also developed a SDG database in collaboration with the Fiji Bureau of Statistics that was used to develop Fiji's first voluntary national report and is currently being strengthened further in preparation for the second VNR. In order to improve better access to this database within government, the Ministry of Economy is working with ESCAP to set up an online SDG tracker for Fiji. This is also being done in collaboration with the Statistics Office in order to ensure authentication and validity of data. Additionally, identification of social, economic, and environmental projects and identifying finances for implementation of such projects are also underway, which can ensure that SDG goals and targets are met and achieved. Further, support is required from all stakeholders to institutionalize the SDG at the whole of government level. Collaboration is needed to ensure that SDG-related data is well received from all stakeholders. The major setback which we continue to face is ensuring access to timely and validated data for reporting. This also requires establishing and enforcing reporting mechanisms and technical work groups across government and non-government partners. Capacity building will also allow us to improve monitoring and evaluation. The lessons and good practices learned will lead to strengthening the national monitoring and evaluation processes. In my concluding remark, I reiterate that monitoring and evaluation is a key element for stock-taking our progress of the SDGs in Fiji and the Pacific. Works are also underway for publishing Fiji's second VNR in 2023, which will better stocktake the pre- and post-COVID progress. Thank you, and Vinakavaka level.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for a very elaborate kind of sharing a roadmap as to how we can take forward the work in Fiji. And of course, there are some lessons learned for the rest of the region as well. So thank you so much for that intervention. Much appreciated to you and the Ministry of Economy. My third distinguished presenter is Mr. Benjamin Sila, Assistant CEO, Social and Environmental Statistics Division, Samoa Bureau of Statistics, Government of Samoa. So it's my great pleasure to invite Mr. Sila to have your intervention, please. Over to you, Mr. Sila. Thank you. Mr. Sila, are you there? Can you hear us, please? Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes. Over to you, Mr. Sila.
Yeah.
Mr. Silla, can you please speak?
Seems they can hear us, but we can't hear them. Sudeep, can I maybe suggest while they still sort out a little bit? I mean, there was a couple of questions which have come through, so we could look at tackling those couple of questions a little bit and then see if we have a little bit more luck with Samoa at the end.
We can do that. I think Mr. Silla's typing something, or maybe words of encouragement. At least we can get started. Silla, maybe we will continue to ensure that we connect you as soon as possible. My colleagues are also here. Will be trying to be in touch with you. But meanwhile, maybe we can start some interactive discussions and some questions that we already received from several members and our partners. And we try to group them actually, so that we have a clear kind of follow-up actions as well on some of these questions. So one of the questions, which is kind of, overall for the region, again, as I said, it came from several countries. So the idea is that how are the member states progressing as a nation in achieving SDGs in the Pacific region? So this is a very important sort of, issue that we need to address. So Chris, maybe I request you to briefly touch upon maybe a minute or so, just to underline the importance of this.
The slides now. Okay.
Yeah, publish it.
Okay.
Over to you, please.
I did just ask Coracut to mute, please, as I respond.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, so I'll have it. It was an important question. As Sudeep mentioned, there were a few countries that actually raised this question prior to the launch earlier. And Armin touched upon this to some degree in the regional component of this launch. So basically, the question is, a lot of the results, the results in the SDG Progress Report, they're focused on showing progress at the regional and the sub-regional level. But an obvious response from countries is, well, how's my particular country going? How's Tuvalu going? How's Fiji going? And so forth. So a really important point that was made during my presentation as well as Armin's is that the indicators that are in the SDG Gateway, which produce these progress assessments, they're the global SDG indicators. So, and there's a few extra proxies that custodian agencies throw in there as well. But it is a little bit limited to how much progress you can actually show at the national level. So this is why we do encourage countries to pick up a tool like the National SDG Tracker, where you can include a lot more of your own national indicators. You can also set more realistic national targets, and you'll be able to come up with much better progress assessments against each of the SDG goals. Now, yes, you can get access to the National SDG Tracker and do an assessment using just the global SDG indicators, but it won't be as meaningful or realistic as if you make the effort to tailor it to your national circumstances. So yes, it can be done, but to give you an assessment of how a country is progressing at the national level, but it's going to be much more meaningful if you go through the process that the National SDG Tracker is encouraging you to do and tailor the indicators to your national circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for that answer. The other question again that came up, several from our colleagues and friends from the Pacific, which is that how was the data to assess progress for a country or as a Pacific region collated? I think this is very important for our statistical offices across the Pacific region, and also it's very important, for all of us to come up with a good information set so that we can make this SDG progress more meaningful for the member state. Chris, over to you, please. You have 1 minute. I think we want to open up for a couple of minutes and then we will close. Chris, thank you. Over to you, please.
I think you said 1 minute because I went for 2 minutes last question. But I guess there's different levels of how the information sort of collated in the SDG Progress reporting. So firstly, I mean, we combined, if we want to get assessments of progress at the goal level, we need to combine the results of progress at the target level. So can I just get you to mute, sorry. So when we produce progress at the goal level, it's a summary of what's taking place. It's a simple average of progress at the target level. And a similar sort of things happen when we provide these progress assessments at the target level. It's a simple sort of average of the progress that's been made at the indicator level. So that's one sort of equating that takes place. But then there's also, I mean, in the SDG Progress Report, it is done for regions and sub-regions. So how do we combine information from each of the countries to do a progress assessment for a sub-region such as the Pacific? So once again, I mean, we're averaging out the results that we're witnessing for each of the Pacific countries that have data to come up with a fair assessment of how that progress is for the Pacific region. Now, if there's not enough countries within that group, say the Pacific, that have enough data, then that's when we exclude them from the analysis, and that's where you see some of the greys in some of the graphs we saw earlier. Back to you. Hopefully that was a minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Always good to be on time. So now, colleagues, friends, I open the floor. If you have, you can, speak up if you wish. You can or also write in the chat box. Either way, now the floor is open. We have about 5 minutes, friends. So I think we can pick up some of the very important points that you would like to raise, maybe. Now that I don't see any pressing questions or queries, maybe I'd like to make one very important announcement, which is that the report itself is now available on our website. Our colleagues already shared the link with all of you, so please have access to that. And also we will have our own website with both the reports and also the slides, the presentation that we just made. And the second issue is also very important. I think now, as you know, this particular launch of the SDG Progress Report is a pre-event culminating to the 9th Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Forum, which is taking place in Bangkok in hybrid mode, 28th to 31st of March. And we'd really request you to join that meeting. Our information for that event is all there on our website, ESCAP website. So please join that meeting. And as I said, we are very encouraged to see that almost all our Pacific member states joined today, and other partners in the region, especially the Crop Agency and friends joined. So it's very encouraging to see that we are making a good progress as well in terms of our participation. That is one of the very fundamental aspects of ensuring that the SDG progress is made. So with that, I really thank all of you, and with a lot of appreciation, and thanks again to all our presenters. Mr. Singh, Mr. Sila, unfortunately we couldn't get the connection right, but we'll of course upload the information and then the PowerPoint that will come along on our website. And with that, we thank all of you and appreciate. Is it Mr. Sila? Is connected? We can still maybe Mr. Sila, our colleagues from the SDF. Chris, do you think Mr. Sila and colleagues could?
I can't see them. See.
Okay. So we'll definitely get back. Chris, we'll talk to our friends in the SDS, and we'll upload, their information on our event webpage. So with that, thank you so much, Vinaka Bakalevu, and have a blessed day. All the best. Thank you so much.